Fear is something that it can, whenever it comes in, it'll strap you down, it'll hold you hostage, it'll really, really slow you down in your walk with God. And whenever we become fearful of something, just like in my example, whenever I was saying, I was scared to get up here and do this, I was slowed down, I didn't want to study, and we see so many things in our lives where we slow down because we're scared of what will happen next. And that's where Elijah's at. But it's a trap, and it keeps you where you are. But in our lives, we have to constantly be moving towards God. And we can't do that if we're trapped. We can't do that if we're trapped in our fear. And I think, so there's so many times throughout the Bible that scriptures use, verses start out with the phrases, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Fear not. And there's so many times in the Bible where God's warning us that fear is a trap, and it's a trap that'll keep us from Him every single time. When we let fear creep into our life, it's a trap that'll keep us from God every single time. And I found a couple of verses that kind of go along with this. So Joshua chapter 1 verse 9 says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for God is with you wherever you go. And then Psalm 34:4 says, I sought the Lord and He answered me and delivers me from our fear. So God's warning us all these times throughout the Bible that fear is a trap, and He didn't call us to be trapped. He didn't call us to be afraid. He's got a plan. He's got a purpose for our life. So we're not called to stay in the same place. If we're trapped, we're staying still. We're not moving if we're trapped. And that's the first type of fear that I wanted to talk about. It's something that holds us back. It's an emotion that a lot of us feel. We may feel it every single day to an extent, just a little bit, a worry here and there. And each time that's a little, we're going to stumble each time that we feel that fear creep in. But the Bible also talks about a very different type of fear, and a fear that's used in a good way. So some verses that I found that describe this fear really well is Proverbs chapter 2 verses 2 through 6, and it says, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you see it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord, and you will find the knowledge of God. So I feel like I heard that phrase, like, you've got to fear God. I feel like I heard that a ton when I was growing up, especially in like a Southern Baptist church. You hear that you've got to fear God all the time. And like when I was growing up, I didn't really understand. Like I had no idea what that meant. Like why are we supposed to fear God if He's our protector? Like why are we supposed to be scared of God? But so what does that actually mean, to fear God? And again, I think that the reason that we get confused on that is because we think of fear as in like the first definition, like the fear that's going to strap us down, the fear that we're running away from, the fear that makes us afraid. But it's not necessarily talking about fear like that in this situation. So fear of the Lord is it's understanding who God is. It's understanding His power. It's taking God seriously and putting Him so high in our life that we have obedience to Him. We trust in Him. We're submitting to Him. It's essentially, to me, the fear of God it's keeping God where He's supposed to be, and that's at the very top. That's at the very most importance. And the Bible actually tells us that the fear of God is the foundation of wisdom, and it leads to life. And I think that the reason it explains it that way is because whenever we fear God, that's a trust. That's an understanding. So we might not know the situation that we're in. We might not know how it's going to end up. And that's kind of where Elijah was at. We might not know where it's going to end up, but we understand that God is there no matter what. We understand that God is present, and we understand that if we're obedient to Him, and that's knowledge. That's knowing that God's going to be there when we need it. And that's where that fear of God comes in. It's that highest of importance in our life. And so trusting God and fearing Him in a way that when it's calling us to do that, it's calling us to trust God and fear Him in a way that whenever it gets difficult, like it did for Elijah, whenever he's facing these threats, we strive after Him despite not knowing the outcome. So, and going back to where Elijah was, that's where he was at. He was facing this fear, but he didn't know what was ahead of him. He knew that he was being he knew that his life was being threatened, and despite seeing everything that God had done, he knew the nature of Jezebel, and these threats, the weight that these threats held, and his fear nature set in, and that's exactly what we do as well. And just like Elijah, we don't always see the plans that God has through, and our fear nature can really overtake us, and it can kind of overtake that fear from the Lord. I feel like whenever we start fearing things in our lives, it can take away that trust that we have, because instead of going towards God, instead of trusting Him, instead of striving after Him, we find ourselves stepping back. We find ourselves trapped and stuck in the same place. So, where does this story end up for Elijah? So despite, at this time, his lack of trust and his fear, and he wasn't turning to God. He was literally asking God to bring him to death. But what happens next is, despite not having that trust, God provides him with food and He provides him with water, enough for a 40-day journey. So God's providing for him either way, despite him being trapped in his fear. But not only that, later on in the text you see God kind of reminded him. It kind of reminded him. He showed him that plan. He showed him that purpose that he had. So He showed him that he wasn't alone. There was other people fighting this same battle in Israel. There was other people around him that had these same issues. And so we see later on throughout Elijah's story, He shows Elijah that he's going to take down Ahab. He's going to take down Jezebel. And he showed him his plans and his for Elijah's successor, Elisha. He shows him those plans for him as well. And I think what God's doing here when He's telling him all this is He's reminding him of His power. And He's reminding him that, hey, let's snap back. You're trapped in your fear right now, but it's not like that. I still have so many things. I still have so many things for you to do. And that kind of snapped Elisha back. And we see that throughout the rest of his story. Elijah prepared Elisha for him to take over as a prophet of the Lord in his place. Later on, we see Ahab and his sons killed. We see them brought away from power. We see Jezebel killed. We see these things come, and they'll fulfill just like God told Elijah. So, despite all these things, God completely delivered Elijah from that fear. Despite him having that little bit of trust and that little bit of push to where Elijah was from where he was saying that he desired to be killed, and God telling him to have that trust in him, that little bit of push brought him back to God. So, what I want us to get out of this is we may not always understand where the plan is headed, and we may become afraid. And there's going to be times in our life where we're going to be trapped, and our fear is going to keep us from truly trusting in God and fearing Him and respecting Him. But I want to share a verse with you that I thought was just really awesome as far as this text goes, and it's Deuteronomy 31:8, and it says, "It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you, and He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." So, despite us not knowing the plan, and just like Elijah, he didn't know the rest of the plan, and obviously we saw it turn out good. In fact, at the end of Elijah's life, he never died. He was brought to heaven alive in a chariot. So, God had so many plans for Elijah to have this awesome ministry and do all these awesome things, even after he got to the point where he was so broken down that he was frozen in his ministry. He was frozen in his life, and he was trying to get away from it. He didn't see the plan. He didn't see the circumstances through. And I feel like that happens so many times in our life. But what we got to realize is God's always ahead of us. He's one step ahead. He's going, those traps that are set, things that we're supposed to fear, He's going through and He's setting all those off. We might not understand it at the time, but God's going through and He's making sure that we don't have to get trapped up in that fear, because He's already got the plan. He's already got what we're doing next. We may not understand it at the time, but that's where it is. And I feel like we let that fear spoil our trust in Him to the point where we don't always see the plan through. And that's the important part is, you've got to see the plan through. Just like Elijah, he wasn't wanting to see the plan through. But God snapped him back and He saw the plan through. So, as I'm getting ready to come to a close here, what I really want you to take into account here is that we're all afraid of things. Every single one of us. There's so many things that scare us, that wear us down, that get us to a point where we're just ready to give up. But if we look at this story, it's not over then. It's not over when we think that we're ready to give up. That's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story, because God still has a plan. He's still walking forward, and He's still ready to take care of you. So just to understand that, and I want you to really, as we're closing here, just all these fears that are holding you back, don't leave with those tonight. Those fears that you brought in, don't leave with those today. And also, there's nothing to fear more than an eternity separated from Christ. So if you've never been saved and if you feel that calling on your life, just please don't leave here that way. Talk to somebody today. So I'm going to pray us out real quick, and then I'm going to let us get the invitation going. Dear God, Lord, I just thank you for this time that we've had, Lord. And I thank you for the message, Lord. I thank you for you speaking through me, Lord. And I just thank you for giving me that opportunity, Lord. I pray that as we go into this invitation, that you just work on each and every one of us, Lord, and just show us that you're a God, that you've taken steps ahead of us, Lord, and that you have a plan. You have a plan and a purpose, Lord, and we just sometimes we have to see it through. I pray that you all give us the strength to beat our fears, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.